So, with the introduction of the MV7, I thought it would be good to have a history of the SM5 and the SM7 for us. So we're going to take a look at that, and away we go, gentlemen and ladies. So 56 years, the SM5, that's the big fat one above there if you're not familiar with that. And the SM7 have been very popular for voiceover work, you know that, TV, radio, film, recording, and now podcasting. But you may not know that both of those microphones use a Unidyne 3 mic element. And the Unidyne 3 was introduced in 1959. So the SM5 and the SM7 are really grandchildren of the Unidyne 1 and children of the Unidyne 2. So we're going to go back and look at some of the ancestry before these microphones started. For you, those who have been a long time at Shure, you're going to know this stuff. For those of you who are new, this will be new material for you. 1939, there's our Unidyne 1, model 55. Why was it unique? It was the first unidirectional moving coil dynamic microphone with a single capsule. This was a big breakthrough to be able to get a cardioid pattern with a single capsule. Here's a 1939 product announcement. It was $45 in 2020 currency. That would be $835. So it was not a cheap mic. Interestingly enough, on that same day, we introduced our first ribbon microphone, which is the Shure Rocket here. We call it a moving conductor, not a ribbon microphone, but that was our first ribbon. So these two microphones came out on the same day. Who invented the uniphase network? That's the acoustical principle employed in the Unidyne when he was only 24 years old. Those of you who have been at Shure for a long time know this name. Those of you who are new may not know Ben Bauer. I can tell you this, if Shure had not hired Ben Bauer in 1936 as a co-op student, we probably wouldn't exist as a company today. In the 20 years he was at Shure, he invented many of the technologies that still are lining our pockets with money today. So he was the inventor of the uniphase acoustical network. That's the thing that allowed you to have a single element directional microphone. Here he is in 1945 in downtown headquarters at Shure. And you need to know that the IEEE in 2014 identified the Unidyne microphone as a key invention of the 20th century. Pretty big deal for us. Here is the actual milestone award that we got in January 31st, 2014 for the single element unidirectional microphone. Just to give you the idea of other milestones awarded by IEEE, the work of Nikola Tesla got a milestone award. The creation of the internet is a milestone award. Breaking of the Enigma code during World War II is a milestone award, and the Apollo 11 moon landing is a milestone award, as is the Unidyne microphone. So it's a great company.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Was Ben Bauer, was he like a hero when he worked there? Was he like, you know, people were bowing down to him, or at the time was it just like, okay, here's just another thing we came up with?
No, he was pretty much seen as the company genius. It's interesting. It's hard to find a picture of him smiling, but he was just so creative. His kids told me that I had an interview with his children. He said he'd come home from work at Shure, have dinner, sleep for 4 hours, and then get up at midnight and work all night. He was a 4-hour guy. And he was pretty much creating stuff every day. So yes, he was known as a genius. And that's how he rose in 10 years. He came in as a co-op student in 1936. And by 1946, he was the vice president of engineering. So yeah, we knew we had a genius on our hands. Did I answer that?
Yep. That's great. Thanks.
Yep. So 2 days, it's going to be from now, or it's going to be November 19th, or Thursday, it's going to be November 19th. And this is a very specific day that we want to remember. So November 19th, 1937, this is from Ben Bauer's lab notebook. And this is the first description they jotted down of the uniphase acoustical network concept. That diagram right there is on the patents, and that diagram right there is the electrical equivalent of the Unidyne acoustical principle. I love this line up here. The following arrangement seems to offer possibilities. Yes, change the entire world, Ben. Also notice it was designed to be a single crystal cardioid microphone at first, and later on in the notebooks he says, I think a dynamic might work better. But this is the day where he first wrote down that principle right there, which we will later see on the patent. Here's what the first operational Unidyne prototype looked like. Doesn't look like much, does it, folks? But he powered it up by sticking a horseshoe magnet on the bottom of it. When I first got my hands on this prototype, I couldn't figure out why I didn't have a magnetic field. Just completely puzzled me. I thought maybe it was a crystal. And it was in his lab notebooks that I discovered a drawing of that prototype with a horseshoe magnet stuck on the bottom. So I thought that's pretty cool about how he actually magnetized it. This is the industrial design prototype. This is wood, carved wood and silver paint. This is what the Unidyne was going to look like originally. And we didn't even know this existed until we moved from Evanston to Niles. And someone crawled underneath the anechoic chamber and brought out some dusty old boxes. And one of those dusty old boxes was this prototype with a note written on the side. It said 1938 prototype for Ben's mic. So that's pretty cool. So we went from prototype to manufactured product in just 2 years. I love this one. What was the inspiration for the Unidyne appearance? Some of you know the answer, but for those of you who don't, take a look at the front end of this car. 1937 Oldsmobile Coupe 6. Same number of horizontal ribs. It looks exactly like a Unidyne. Interestingly enough, SN Shure was a loyal Olds customer, so we don't know. He might have owned this car and one day said, wow, that would make a great looking microphone. Let's make a design like that. Excuse me. Who created the Unidyne industrial design? Well, here's Ben Bauer over here. A little spit curl. He's like 25 or 24 years old. And this gentleman here, Wesley Scherer, was the industrial designer. He didn't work for Shure. He was a contractor who was doing graphic elements for us, logos and letterhead and so forth. And Mr. Shure, there's Mr. Shure right there, gave him a chance to create a microphone, and he created the Unidyne. After he stopped working for Shure as a contractor, he went to work for Play School Toys in Chicago, and he was there at Play School Toys for the rest of his life. So the Unidyne microphone industrial designer designed toys later on in his career. Perry, you're old enough to know this. You recognize who that is right there, Perry? Any idea?
It's a little, I do not, but I know who's in that same row.
I see SK there.
Where's SK?
Right
here?
Here?
Right
Right
there.
there. That's
Yep.
Sam McDonald.
Yep. But I was pointing this up because, Perry, that's Jack Berman. You remember Jack Berman?
Vividly.
Yes.
Yeah, that's tough to see.
And that guy there, that's Ralph Glover. He was our first engineer. So Ben Bauer reported to Ralph Glover, and eventually Ben Bauer took Glover's position at Shure. Here's our most important patent, I believe, in our entire history. This is the Unidyne microphone, which is actually called conversion of wave motion into electrical energy. Remember that little jotting on the first diagram I showed you from Ben Bauer's lab notebook? There it is on the patent. By the way, he changed his name from Baumschweiger to Bauer, shortened it in 1941. Baumschweiger was seen as too German of a name, and we were getting a lot of World War II contracts there. And sometimes the military people would say, well, how do we know this guy's not a spy? So he just basically shortened his name to Bauer. He was from the Ukraine, by the way. He was not German. So in 1951, we come up with the Unidyne 2. That's the smaller version of it, 55S. That's the size of the microphone we make now. S stands for small. It was a reduction in size of approximately 33% because television, which was becoming the new medium in everyone's household now, said that the Unidyne 1 was too large. So make it smaller, and we did. I like this ad. Here's an ad from 1952. The microphone that needs no name. Look really closely at that ad. Shure does not appear anywhere in it. Those two microphones have become so popular in 13 years that we could run an ad that basically said, everybody knows this microphone. We don't even need to tell you who makes it. I think it's a pretty cool ad. So Elvis used the Unidyne 1 so much that people still refer to it as the Elvis microphone. And Frank Sinatra used the Unidyne 2. Here he is probably, well, I would say this is probably in the 60s, but he started using the Unidyne first in the 1940s with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. And of course, tattoo artists. Do a Google search sometime, just put in microphone tattoos, and you'll find page after page after page of microphone tattoos, all of them being the Unidyne. And my favorite story is one guy came up to me at an AES show, and on his left bicep, he had the Unidyne, and on the right bicep, he had the polar pattern, and on his chest, he had the frequency response. I kid you not. So, 1959, we introduced the 545. Now, that's the grandchild of the Unidyne 1. We call it the world's smallest cardioidynamic microphone at the time, and this was an end-fire microphone, not a side-fire like the 1 and the 2 were. Notice it had an Amphenol connector on it, and the user net price back then was $50. But who invented it? Ben Bauer left Shure in 1958. The inventor was a guy named Ernie Seeler. Ernie was born in Cuba, and he actually worked for Shure from 1953 and retired in 1997. And the Unidyne 3 was, actually Bauer did some of the original groundwork for the Unidyne 3, but Ernie took it over and finished it up. Of course, with the Unidyne 3, sound systems could be louder, more rock concerts being outside. Unidyne 3 was really one of the reasons that rock and roll could have such large venues as Shea Stadium and so forth eventually. But ironically, Ernie was passionately disliked rock and roll music. He's a classical music guy. And it's just so funny that his microphone became the iconic rock and roll microphone. He wanted the frequency response of the Unidyne 3 to be flat. This presence peak that we all love now, he considered was a flaw. And he tried really hard to get rid of it. He could never get rid of it. And I always ask the question, if we had gotten rid of it, would the Unidyne 3 be as popular as it is? And I think the answer to that is no. Now, this person here, I think only Perry's old enough to remember him, if you might remember. His name is Bob Carr. And in the early 60s, Bob was our professional products marketing manager. And he was given the job of trying to get Shure microphones into radio and television and film studios. We weren't very popular with those that marketed at the time. So he came up with the idea of the SM, the studio microphone line. It was based on existing mics, like the Unidyne 3, but with new features: a dark, non-reflective finish, an XLR connector instead of an Amphenol, balanced low impedance wiring, no high impedance or unbalanced, and if it had no switch, or if there was a switch, to hide it. Excuse me. So in 1964, we brought out our first SM studio line. There was the SM5, which is the variation of the Unidyne 3, the SM33, the Johnny Carson mic. There was a variation on the 333, excuse me, an SM50, an SM56, and an SM76. Those are the first 5 SM microphones. So here it is, 1964. We introduced the Unidyne 3 SM5 studio microphone. Though it eventually became popular as an on-air radio microphone, the initial target was overhead boom use for film and televisions, and we'll tell you about how that failed very quickly. So there was an SM5A, a 50 ohm mic, and an SM5B, a 150 ohm mic, and the user price was $225, which is $1,860 in 2020. So it was not a cheap microphone by any means. Here's the first magazine ad for the SM5. The boom microphone that ignores everything except the dialogue and tells you all the reasons here that you'd want to use this for a boom microphone. Of course, most boom microphones were condenser microphones, and they still are. They were, and they still are, but we didn't have a condenser microphone back then, so we did the best with the element we had, which is the Unidyne 3. So 64 to 69, 5 years. The SM5 is having a difficult time getting established, but other Unidyne 3s are becoming very popular for live sound reinforcement. This is not news to anybody on this call. The Unidyne 3 SM56 debuted. That was for $81. Non-reflective finish. Look really carefully. You can see this actually was a two-tone color. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water here. This is a two-tone finish. It was a lighter gray and then some darker gray spots on it. This model turned out to be very popular in Las Vegas, which had a mic theft problem because you could actually take this and Loctite it down to the stands, and then people couldn't steal the microphones. The Unidyne 3, of course, improved gain before feedback at rock concerts. The Beatles were an early adopter of the Unidyne 3. Here they are in Chicago in 1965. They're performing at Comiskey Ballpark in Chicago, and I happen to like this. Here's a 545 Unidyne 3 with a windscreen held on by a rubber band. I love that. That's how sophisticated the sound systems were. The SM57 was introduced in 1965, $63. And of course, Todd, we all know about the White House using them since 1966. We won't need to go into that, but since they've never had a failure in 54 years, and they've been anywhere from 4 microphones on the lectern to 1 microphone. And of course, we know it's a great onstage microphone for snare drums.
Sometimes we wish there had been some failures.
Well, I like to say there's been more lies told through SM57 microphones than any other microphone in the world. 1966, there's the 58 comes out, $81, and of course, it was nothing but a 57 with a ball on it. But you might be interested in this. First year sales, 145 units. And our annual sales did not exceed 1,000 until 1971. So it was not a big hit when it first came out. In fact, it took over 10 years for it really to gain some traction. Then what happened in June 1967, the Monterey Pop Festival happened. One of the first big outdoor rock festivals, and all the microphones on stage were SM56s. A company called McCune Sound in San Francisco supplied the PA system, and Abe Jacobs, who later went on to New York theater fame as far as a sound designer, specified all the mics. So this is where the big acts of the day first had a chance to use our SM microphones. In fact, in the archive, we have one of the microphones that was on stage with Jimi Hendrix that day. And there it is. That's a picture of the mic we've got. And this is not Monterey Pop, but you can see that red sticker there. That was the Harry McCune sound sticker. And I found this on eBay. And the owner didn't know what it was, but I did. And so that's how we got it for the archive. Next time you're in Shure, when we open up again and you want to see it or take a picture of yourself with it, I'll be happy to do that. So late 60s, SM56, SM57, SM58, they're starting to grow in popularity. Poor SM5, not doing anything. So what does Shure do? Let's introduce a third model. So we introduced the SM5C. This was basically an SM5B with a 100 hertz high pass filter. And that was to attenuate low frequency transients that happened when you swung the boom arm left and right, either from wind turbulence or just boom motion. So just was again an SM5B with a high pass filter or low cut filter, if you will. 6 years after its introduction, SM5 not happening. It's a moving coil dynamic microphone. Output level is determined by the permanent magnet strength or the length of the voice coil. You couldn't alter either of those without a major engineering design. But interestingly enough, on-air radio DJs were starting to use it because it was close talked. And when you close talk the mic, you didn't have to worry about the output level that you didn't have at a distance. So what happened was the on-air radio people started using this, and we really were kind of unaware of this. But far fewer were sold than the outside world imagined. So here's my one question to you guys, if there's any ladies on to my audience, I should say. During the best sales year for the SM5, how many units in total did we sell? That's SM5A and SM5B and SM5C in 1 year. I want you to take your guess and just shout them out while I sit there. I'm going to get another drink of water here. So shout out your guess about how many we sold total in the best year ever.
400.
750.
500.
501.
Come on down.
130.
Yeah, 230.
Who said 230?
Chris.
250, Chris.
Wow. Best year ever.
One every business day.
Wow.
And why was it? Well, radio stations were the primary customers. They didn't wear out or stop working. All you had to do was replace the windscreens on a regular basis, and you had a brand new microphone. So basically, once the station had its inventory, good to go. So after 24 years on the market, we discontinued it in 1988. User price had risen to $586. But now let's just back up to 1969. So the SM5 was expensive to manufacture. Some customers felt it was too large. Many customers felt it didn't have enough output level for boom operation. It didn't. So we decided to offer a smaller, lower cost model. And by the end of 1972, the SM7 was ready to be introduced. Now, the SM7 is a variation on the SM57 element. The internal vibration mount is a variation of the Shure A53M air-filled rubber donut. The yoke mount is a variation on the SM5 yoke. And the only thing really brand new in the SM7 was the design, the actual look of it. So here's the first ad, 1972, 1973. Actually, this is the flyer. It was introduced in late 72, but the first units were sold in 1973, and the user net price was $256.80. The voiceover is the primary market. No longer are we pushing this for overhead boom use. We kind of gave up on that. The features, well, we had, of course, the two switches, which either give you a presence boost or a flat response or a bass roll off or a presence boost with a bass roll off. So that's how you can do that. We'll talk about where those ideas came from later. The air suspension was the rubber-filled donut, the pop filter. Actually, most of the pop filtering came from not the foam itself, but by setting that cartridge back about 2 inches. And a very good cardioid pickup pattern. So that was the features. Here's the SM7 mic element. When it first came out, you'll notice it has this slightly larger rear acoustical chamber that extends the low end. It gives you that more low end than an SM57 would have. Here's the air suspension rubber donuts, and here's the humbucking coil that we later improved. But that's the basic element when it came out in 1972. And this designed it, Jerry Pleiss. He was a microphone development engineer from the 1960s to 1990s. And though he worked on the interior of the acoustical design, his main aspect, the main thing he really contributed to the SM7 was the way it looked. And he was not an industrial designer, but he really hit the ball out of the park with this. We got the industrial design patent here in 1974. By the way, excuse me again. A design patent covers the way a product looks. A utility patent covers the way the product operates. So this is a design patent. And actually, we're trying to get a trademark on the look of that microphone now because it's so unique, and we may have a chance of doing that. For 26 years, the SM7 remained completely the same, unchanged. And then in 1999, we added an improved humbucking coil. We had the humbucking coil in there before, but now we need to improve it because the radio studio started to add CRT computer monitors next to the disc jockey, so they would read text off of that rather than off a sheet of paper. And these CRTs had magnetic fields that were close, and the microphone were hum and buzz. So we had to improve the way the microphone got rid of handled electromagnetic interference. And we changed the design of the mounting yoke. That was just to make it easier to manufacture. But in 2001, we added this big accessory bulbous windscreen. Now, if you go back and you think about the SM5, you notice this looks like a miniature SM5. We did that on purpose. Many of the radio stations who were just beating us over the head every year at NAB, why'd you guys discontinue the SM5? Of course, what I wanted to say is because we only sell 250 a year. They wanted the look of it. And so we said, well, let's make this thing look like an SM5. And as soon as we did that, sales started to go up. So here you go. From 1973 to 2008, the average annual sales of the SM7 were stable. It was average selling. It was good enough to keep, but not poor enough to discontinue. And in 2008, podcasting community found it. Now here's a 35-year-old microphone. And all of a sudden the podcasters find it, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And annual sales started to increase noticeably. In 2020 now, the annual sales are over 25 times greater than the sales in 2007. And this microphone is going to turn 50 years old in 2023. It's just astonishing to me. Imagine that you're a product manager at Shure, and it's 2006, and you go to your boss, and your boss says, "We got to get rid of this SM7. It's 35 years old. It's just not doing anything." And you say, "Boss, I know in 2008 the thing's really going to take off." Who's going to believe that? Nobody. And yet, that's exactly what happened. So, some notable uses of the Shure SM7 microphone. This is kind of fun. I just went through and got different things. Again, I have to say this for legal reasons, educational purpose only. They do not imply an endorsement of our products. Northern Exposure, TV show in the early 1990s. This is actor John Corbett. He was a disc jockey in this little town in northern Alaska. And here he is, uses an SM7 with the windscreen pulled off. I don't know why they never put the windscreen on. I think it made it look funky, but that was one of the earliest TV exposures of the SM7. Here's a current show called Dear White People on Netflix. Actor Marquis Richardson takes place in a radio studio, and they have SM7s on the set. Wolfman Jack, back in the 70s and 80s, he had his own SM7 he would travel with. He did shows on the East Coast and the West Coast, and he would take his SM7 with him wherever he went. Current, Howard Stern, Robert Quivers has been his sidekick for many, many years, and she's an SM7 user as well, with the larger SM5-ish windscreen on it. NPR, National Public Radio, they have a show called Studio 1A. This is their, they use SM7s there, but this is the ad for their promotional photo for the show. SM7 in the recording studio. Michael Jackson doing the Thriller album. He stands next to Quincy Jones. And this windscreen here, by the way, is a modified Neumann windscreen that they had cut out some of the foam in the middle of it to make it fit the SM7. Mick Jagger has used an SM7 for many of his vocals. This is probably from the late 70s. And every time they would do a record, even today, they put a condenser mic on Jagger and an SM7. And they record the vocals with the different types of mics. And then during the mix down, they decide which microphone cuts through better in the mix, and that's what they use. I've been told that most of the time you're hearing Jagger through an SM7. This is just recent. This just came out this week. Here's Willie Nelson. He's streaming a concert at home, and he's got two SM7s there. This is from his home. I think he lives in Oklahoma, or maybe Texas, I guess. But anyways, Willie's the user of the SM7 at home. Podcasting, of course, a big thing. Mark Marone and his WTF podcast. Here he is with ex-President Barack Obama. SM7 with a larger windscreen, SM7 larger windscreen, and the same thing here. So 3 SM7s and Marones. Here's the actress Anna Faris, her podcast Unqualified with her SM7. And my favorite one of all, here's the SM7 in streaming, a live press conference somewhere in Cupertino, California. Gee, could that be Apple? I guess it might be Apple. This is a stream. This is from August of this year. And I make this note, the SM7 mic in the photo still operates perfectly, even though it still uses 1.0 firmware from 1972. So Apple, take that. So just to finish up this for that's not Ben Bauer, by the way, but this is just some frequently asked questions I've received about the SM7. What does Unidyne mean? Well, we named our first single element moving coil directional microphone in 1939 Unidyne. Unidyne means a single mic element and a directional pattern. And a dyne is a dynamic mic element, but it's also a unit of force using acoustics. So you combine those two together and you get multiple meanings of Unidyne. We were granted a trademark for Unidyne in 1960. That trademark is still active and probably one of our most useful trademarks. Can a singer damage the SM7 with excessive sound pressure level? No. The diaphragm moves a maximum of 1/1000th of an inch, and even if someone was loud enough to make that diaphragm move that much, it would be stopped by the magnetic pole piece and move no farther. The output would be distorted, but of course it wouldn't damage the mic. Unidyne 3 was patented March 16th, 1966, and here's the patent for Ernie Sealer, we mentioned before. Microphone utility patent. Note this simplified acoustical analog, the same drawing as we saw 1937. March 19th, 1937 from Ben Bauer. There it is, the same concept. And so since the Unidyne 3 was patent, that covered all the microphones that used the Unidyne 3 element, including the SM5 and the SM7. Do the 57 and the 57 use the same element? They are similar, but not the same. So the SM7 diaphragm is the same size and shape, but it's not as thick, and it's a little bit more flexible, meaning compliant. The SM7 voice coil employs a thinner wire and has 3 times as many turns as the SM57 voice coil. And this I found out last week. The original resonator, by the way, the resonator is the molded plastic cap that covers the diaphragm. The original SM7 resonator was simply the SM57 part with 1/2 the length removed by sawing it off as a pre-assembly step. I love that. So here's the entire SM57 resonator, and you would take a saw and saw off that portion, and that would become the resonator for the SM7. Now with the SM7B, it has its own custom molded resonator, but just gives you an idea about how sometimes things behind the scenes are less sophisticated than you might imagine. What's the origin of the SM7? It's a sequence. There was the SM3 ribbon microphone. By the way, I forgot to point that out. In that Bob Carr photo I showed you, we can go back if you want. There's an SM3 ribbon microphone in the background. When we're done, if you want to see that, I'll go back to that. Then there was the SM5, and then there's the SM7. We used SM1 and SM2 as model numbers for on-air sport broadcasting headsets in the 80s. We've never used SM4, 6, 8, or 9. And of course, we do have KSM 8 and KSM 9. The origins of the SM7 switches. Well, in 1969, we brought out a line of 6 audio adapters called the A15 series of problem solvers. We still have some A15s today. We have the phase reverser, we have the line adapter, and so forth. They were passive. They didn't require any power. You just plugged them into the mic line. 2 of them that came out, the A15HP and the A15RS, were built into the SM7. The A15HP attenuated bass frequencies, and the A15RS attenuated treble frequencies above 1000. So he took the same circuits that came out in 1969, and that's when we started working on the SM7, it was in 69, and put them inside the SM7. So that's where the concept of those came from. They were actually inline adapters that we already had the circuits for. And some final trivia here. 1973, the SM7 has a user price of $257. In 2020, it's $499. If it had kept up with inflation, it would be $1,485 now. So it's really quite a bargain. The SM5 had a dark gray windscreen and a light gray windscreen that was inspired by the original SM microphone handles, that light gray paint with dark flecks over the top of it. The 5 element and the SM7 element are set back from the leading edge of the foam. That's to reduce pea popping. Neither model has a transformer in it, and that's to basically control electromagnetic interference you have when they were nearby a lighting board or by a CRT. And also the new Motive MV7 microphone is named for the SM7. Big, no surprise there. Or as Yoda says, surprised I'm not. So let's wrap this up. Then we can go through the questions. 47 years after its debut, more popular than ever, the SM7 is, with engineers, performers, online gamers, recording studios. And this is a quote I just found recently from a customer. I've worked in radio for 36 years, and the best microphone I ever used was the SM7B. Nothing else is close. All right, that wraps that up. Should we go back? I'm go way back. I want to show you that. Bob, I forgot to show you that. I want to show you that SM3. Hang on. Sorry, I got to go back here.
Was that the one in the stand?
Yep. Did you notice that, Perry?
I saw that.
There you go. Right back there. That's the SM3. We've got a couple of them in the archives. A few of them escaped out into the wilds as prototypes, but we never brought it out. It was designed to compete with the RCA microphones. So with that.
So back in 1964, when the SM5 came out up into the 70s, and you wanted to buy an SM5, or even when the new SM7 came out, where did you buy those?
Washington Music.
And Perry was there on Thursdays.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, music stores didn't carry that. Those too. Where did you go to market with those microphones? Who sold them?
Dale Electronics.
Yeah, distributors. We at the time you would buy a lot of microphones from electronic distributor parts houses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like AC Radio Supply in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those cats. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Was BSW around back then?
Not that I'm aware of. If it was a different name.
How instrumental was Bob Carr in launching the SM line? Do you think?
It was him completely.
I thought,
That was his idea. And keep in mind, we were making money hand over fist in the 60s with hi-fi cartridges. You know, build them for $5, sell them for $50. Yeah, I love that. Ray Ward, who was our vice president of sales at the time, was a big hi-fi guy and really could care less about microphones. And Bob Carr really had a struggle on his hand to even get any traction inside of the company to pay attention to microphones. In fact, the SM57 and the SM58 were almost discontinued in 1970.
what?
Yep. Well,
Wow.
Carr said they were going to sell so much. They weren't even close to that. There was a big meeting. I got this firsthand from Roger Ponto, who was the sales manager at the time, who hired me at Shure. Roger said there was a big meeting in Ray's office, and Ray said, Bob Carr, we've given these things 5 or 6 years and not doing anything. I think we should get rid of them. And Roger allegedly spoke up and said, well, before we do that, let me see if they might be good for sound reinforcement. I'm going to take a bunch out to Las Vegas and see if the showrooms like using them. Well, aren't we lucky? But yeah, that close.
Hey, could you, in some future episode, I would be really curious about the genesis of wireless. I at Shure, I know I was there in the telex, when we sat around the table.
Yep.
And we're into wireless, and it was just a telex piece. But
Yep.
that would fascinate me. I think that would be.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a nice presentation all ready to go on the Shure Vagabond, which was from '53.
That'd be awesome.
I got to be honest. We sit through a lot of video Zoom calls. I could do this once a week minimum.
Oh, aren't you kind, Jeff?
It's great.
Aren't you kind, man? You know, all I do is I just write stuff that I find interesting myself and hope someone else does.
Well, if you had a podcast, you'd have a pretty good sized crew of people watching.
Oh man, that's just,
Yeah,
thank
but
you.
what microphone would you use?
Was that?
Wah,
But
wah,
what
wah.
microphone would you use for your podcast?
He'd go into the archives and pull out an SM5.
MV7. In fact, I can finally show it. I've been using this MV7 since March, and every time someone would ask me, "Wow, what are you using?" I said, "SM7." You know,
How big is the arsenal of actual products at Shure
What do you
in the
mean?
archives?
we've got pretty much one of everything we've ever made. Typically, we like to have 2 samples. I think the last count in actual products is around 3,500 at the moment. Now we don't have every variation. You know, we've got like one example of the array microphone. We don't have like every color and everything like that. So, but we have at least one example of that. There is one mic stand I'm missing from the 30s that I've only seen one of them, and I know who's got it, and they wanted $20,000 for it. And I was like, no, yeah, I'm not going to pay that.
I've
Pretty
got a
much.
Shure subwoofer in my storage if you want it.
Which one, from HTS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the HTS stuff. we have unopened Vocal Master boxes.
Wow.
I saw those the last time I was out there.
Yeah. So it's it's pretty complete. And you know, what's really exciting for me is that, I mean, the products are really cool, and that's what I like to see and touch. But we have 500 boxes of offsite storage that no one's looked at in 50 or 60 years. And that's where I found the Ben Bauer lab notebooks, was an offsite storage. But just recently I went through a box because we have to sort it. You know, we pay for these things, right? And so are we keeping them? And I found all the blueprints and hand drawings for the microphones we made during World War II. So the T30 microphones, and these are all done on linen and done on, vellum, and just beautiful, beautiful drawings. Way cool. But yeah, I'd be happy to do the Vagabond one for you. I've got one of my tech tips laid out all of the different the series of microphones, starting with the Telex. And I can refer you to that tech tip if you want to read those. But the Vagabond, I created the Vagabond webinar for when I was overseas. I was in Europe for 6 weeks last year, when you could travel, and that was one of the things that I talked about, because that's a pretty interesting story. We were way ahead of everybody with that, so I'd be happy to do that one for you guys in the future if you wanted to.
Sure. Do you ever go into the archives for products and like pull stuff out and listen to it?
Can I? Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the things we have to do now, once the COVID thing goes away, is that we have a new database for the archive, and we actually have to go in and touch every single item that's in there. And every time we do that now, we're going to try to see if it works. But my favorite story is just how many times I've been surprised or have been misled. For example, we made a model in 1939 called the Rocket 50 that was introduced the same time as the Unidyne was. And it was called a moving conductor. And so moving conductor, moving coil, right? And I thought it was a moving coil. For years, I thought it was a moving coil. And went in there one day to take it apart so I could look at the moving coil element, and this ribbon microphone is staring me in the face. And I did the best Homer Simpson you've ever seen in your life. I literally stared at this thing for a minute. It goes, this is impossible. Our first ribbon microphones came out in 1952. Nope, 1939. We call them moving conductor. We didn't call them ribbon. And the only reason I can think about that is that maybe ribbon was too tied to RCA, or maybe ribbon was just, even back then, those are too fragile. And Mr. Shure didn't want to call it a ribbon, so we came up with the term moving conductor. But it's a ribbon microphone. So, yeah, I go back to another thing I found recently, very exciting. I found a 16 millimeter film from 1943, where it's a film of us building the T17 microphones on the line. And we had all that transferred to high quality video. And at the very end of this 15-minute film, which showed all the steps of building a T17, there was about 15 seconds of Mr. Shure accepting an award. And so that's the earliest moving footage of Mr. Shure that we found. I just found that about 6 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, you got a cool gig, man.
Yes, you do.
It is a really yeah.
So who fills your shoes when you
retire.
yes.
Well, no plans of that. You know, Mrs. Shure. Quick story about this, and this is it chokes me up because this is the last time I talked to Mrs. Shure. So she was about 2 weeks. Turns out she was 2 weeks away from when she passed away. And I get a phone call one day at noon. And I see it's her phone number, and I pick it up, and this is the secretary, and she says, "Mrs. Shure would like to talk to you." And I hadn't seen her for probably 5 months because she was too ill to come in. And she said to me, Michael says, "Are you thinking of retiring?" And I said, "No, Rose, I don't have any immediate plans." He says, "Well, don't retire because you'll rust. And besides," she says, "when I'm gone, you have to carry on the history of the company. Will you do that for me?"
Wow.
Wow.
So I was going to say, "Nah, Rose, I don't want to do that." Part of the reasons I write the tech tips every week is I'm trying to document all this stuff that I've got, that I have in my head. And, you know, Julie Snyder, who is our librarian, she knows a lot about this, but she hasn't worked there as long, and she doesn't have the technical background, and she can't necessarily tie together all the pieces sometimes of, oh, that goes with this and that goes with this, and that's how they come together. So, you know, that's why I'm trying to do these webinars and get the word out. And also, if, you know, you have suggestions about other subjects like the wireless, again, maybe I can look at one that starts at telex and goes forward from there.
That's the one I would
Yeah,
like to
that would
see.
be great.
Yeah, I think about doing, like, get the time is Shure products that came out from market A and market B said, no, it's like this, you know, like the green bullet, perfect example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, here's a two-way radio microphone. No, it's a harmonica microphone. I mean, we've got so many examples of that in our history that, you know, SM58, right? SM58 was designed as an interview mic. No, it's not. It's a rock and roll mic. Oh yeah, that's what we meant.
You could make one of those match games where you have to match up the microphone with the application it was designed for.
Oh, that's a good idea, Tim. I like that. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, thank you
Right.
very
Yes,
much.
thank
This
you very
was,
much.
Thanks,
time
Michael.
Stay
well
safe,
spent.
guys.
It's great.
All right.
Thanks, Mike. It's great.
Glad you
We'll do
enjoyed
the
it.
next one.
Awesome.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank
See you
you.
later.